Appreciate you guys coming out. I know there's been a lot you've already taken in during the last 3 days, and you hopefully got out and had some fun as well. So appreciate everyone making it out, and hopefully this will be worth your while. The title of the topic and the talk is Growing Your Game on Facebook. And we're, as you see, we're going to be primarily gearing this toward Facebook games. So if you're a developer on Facebook, but as you know, the landscape has shifted quite a bit. And it used to be that if you had a Facebook game, you were going to be, you know, using Facebook to grow that game. And if you had a mobile game, you were using other channels. And that's changing. So we're going to speak kind of to the basics of Facebook game acquisition, and then also to a little bit of how you can leverage Facebook for mobile acquisition. And so that'll tie into a little bit of what you've heard from Facebook during this conference as well. I also want to introduce Philip Runyon, who is going to be helping me out a little bit, as he's been a little bit more in the trenches, so to speak. I thought he would bring a nice viewpoint. So just a quick background on who we are and why we're here speaking on user acquisition. So as Jill mentioned, I'm with Brighter Option, which has now been acquired by Buddy Media, and I'll go into that a little bit. Previous to that, I was working at a company called RockU, and just by show of hands, who's heard of RockU or is familiar with RockU? So I thought so. So funny story. This is kind of how I described, you know, my first days at RockU. This was about 2008-ish, and so if you'll remember the social game landscape and Facebook about then, there was RockU and a company called Slide, and we were kind of like two cars in the right-hand lane of the freeway, and no one else was on the road. And we were kind of looking at each other, kind of going back and forth, and we'd kind of copy each other. And, you know, we were so focused on each other, kind of cruising along at 55, that all of a sudden we just heard this boom. And we looked out of the corner of our eye, and something had just flown past us in the left-hand lane. And that was Zynga, just saying peace out as it went down the freeway. And so that changed the whole game. All of a sudden we were doing these kind of, you know, first generation applications, and then Zynga came along, and all of a sudden this space blew up with game development. So with me is Philip Runyon. Philip has been, is currently at MaoDao, so they work a lot on cross promotion and helping grow your games that way. Previous to that, he was at Double Down Interactive, who you may know for shooting out cannons of money 2 days ago, as well as a great game they developed. And he's also been a consultant to several other game developers, so a lot of great experience. So really quick overview on Buddy Media and our kind of entrance into the space. So Buddy Media was started in 2007 and was focused really on helping brands and organizations manage their Facebook pages. Brighter Option was started in 2010. What we were doing, and that's where I was, what we were doing at the time was working with games companies to leverage all the different user acquisition channels and to help, you know, be their outsourced marketing agency. And that's when we kind of developed software for acquiring users on Facebook and doing that in kind of a scalable manner. Buddy Media acquired Brighter Option in 2012, February of 2012, and Salesforce.com has announced that it will acquire Buddy Media in August of 2012, so lots happened in the last year. We've definitely had a long history in gaming and worked with a number of games clients to help with their Facebook user acquisition strategies. So this just gives you an overview of that. In terms of scope, so where we fit into this landscape, and in a second I'm going to walk you through kind of all the different user acquisition channels out there and how to think about it. We focus on paid Facebook user acquisition, so Facebook ads. And so this graphic is showing the scope of some of the ads we've been doing that our clients use our software to manage their Facebook ad campaigns. So in June of 2012, about 54 billion impressions. So a lot of data, a lot of insights, and a lot of learnings about what works and what doesn't work in Facebook in terms of growing your game through paid channels. And that's one other thing I just want to clarify. When we talk about growing your game, there's obviously a lot of in-game mechanics you can do to kind of virally grow your game and maintain users. We're going to be speaking more about kind of the marketing of your game and the paid acquisition channels. Facebook, as it's evolved over the years, that's become more and more important, obviously. So the four areas we're going to touch on is, first, what are the different channels that are available to you? Second, how to really dig deep to understand those channels. And this honestly fits perfectly with what we just heard from Josh at Contagion, for those of you who heard that. And literally everything he talked about, we would echo. So we won't go into a lot of detail on that, but just to say that in all of these activities, keep track of the data and understand it. Third is efficiency, so how to make the best use of your time. We know that as game developers, your time is somewhat limited, and a lot of it's going to be focused on great game development. So how can you be efficient but also make sure you're focused on acquiring users? And lastly, what are some of the new trends we're seeing? So in terms of channels, and Philip went through this in his earlier life, there's a lot that's available to you and a lot that's going to be kind of pitched to you. So everyone's going to kind of claim to be able to drive installs for your game and to be able to help grow your game. So how do you kind of sort all of this out? We'll give you kind of a nutshell of what we've seen, and I'll let Phil speak to his experience, but typically in user acquisition, having someone within the Facebook environment and keeping them in the Facebook environment is going to convert much better. So you'll have lower acquisition costs than trying to find someone outside of Facebook and bring them into Facebook. And we've highlighted a few of the examples here. Facebook ads, so doing direct ad buys with Facebook, leveraging a cross-promotion network, so cross-promotion with other games, or kind of an in-game banner ad network. And so I'll let Phil kind of speak a little bit to his experience of what he's seen, in evaluating these channels, what works, what rises to the top, how to consider these things.
Great, thanks. So as far as the Facebook ads channel goes, I don't know if anybody here has gotten involved in a whole lot of pay-per-click management. That was kind of my thing that I did prior to getting the social game space. And in that, pretty much your product, whatever it is, you go to Google, you go to MSN, you go to Yahoo, and you buy advertising on that. For the social game space, it's completely different. You're talking about pulling people out of, or taking them from a non-social experience, trying to drive them into Facebook, where potentially they're logged in, they're not logged in. It feels like a bait and switch. So at least in my experience, buying off Facebook gets extremely costly. And as Josh said, costly depends on really what your profit per install is. As a new game, I would highly recommend starting off with your Facebook advertising, whether it's yourself, a third party, using a third party tool. It's just your cost per install is able to stay relatively low, which gives you some time to actually generate some data, which is, as Josh has stated, very helpful. You can make a lot more decisions when you know how long does it take before a person makes their first deposit in your game. What is your threshold of pain before you're willing to say, okay, well, we need to hit profitability by X amount of days. Initially, Facebook ads definitely is the way to go in order to keep those costs down and drive that data. Secondly, for cross-promotion, there are a few players in the game right now, and I'm sure more will come out, depending on the type of game that you have. I think different app bars make sense for different companies. Obviously, I am with Maodao, so it behooves me to say, go with them. But at the end of the day, there are so many different apps out there, whether you're in the social casino space, whether you're in the more utility-style app space, if you're in an MMO. There's a whole variation, and my advice to you is to test. I don't think there's any one great, perfect answer. You'll find out based upon the data. Data doesn't lie. Lastly, in-app networks. I found these actually work pretty well if you can find a good network that targets your users. If you have an ad network that is very heavily geared towards males and you need traffic from 30 plus females, probably isn't going to work out the best for you. They do exist, and they definitely can be effective. I know iWin participates in that a little bit. King.com would be another one. So there's definitely money to be made there, installs to be gained, and insight on your data.
Great. Yeah. So again, the key takeaway here is we're basically saying, there may be there's a few kind of affiliate networks out there off Facebook that can help drive some users. Primarily, your focus will be within Facebook. A few different channels. Test them all. Generally, what we hear is that the highest quality users, the highest ARPU users, come from buying Facebook ads. But there's definitely a place for all of these and to kind of find the right mix for you. So if you are buying Facebook ads, just so you're aware, there's a couple different options. You've got basically outsourcing. There's a lot of kind of third-party agencies out there that will manage your ad buys for you. So this is a great route to take, especially if you're very limited resources, don't have the time to devote right now, but as we saw earlier, you're kind of ready to launch and you need to start promoting this. So a lot of third parties that know their stuff very well. Players like AdParlor and Nanigans have been in the game a long time and understand that very well. So that's one route to take. In-house is definitely something you need to do as well, simply to gain the expertise and knowledge and keep the data. So basically managing in-house, if you're new to it, start by going to the Facebook native tool and just getting familiar with the ad buys, the bidding process. After that, as you're ready to scale, that's where you can use kind of third-party tools. That's where we fit into the ecosystem, but that's what's going to help you. And the reason being is, as you'll see, buying Facebook ads, and especially when you're very focused on performance, is a lot like day trading. And you're going to need to put in, you know, a bunch of blocks and barriers and alerts and upweight the bid and downweight the bid and watch this and watch that. And so there comes to a point where you're really trying to grow your game, and hopefully it's a huge success. Hopefully your acquisition costs are going to, you know, you're monetizing so well that you can put investment behind it. So that's where you definitely want to leverage tools that can provide a lot more data and insights. So in terms of the data, we won't go too deeply into this, but the notion here is exactly what you just heard about, which is don't just think about CPI, don't just look at all your different channels and figure out your cost per install, because that's pretty meaningless. I mean, if I was going to buy stock, I wouldn't just buy the stock that I can get for the least amount of money, obviously. I'm going to buy the stock that's going to get the best return on investment. And so going beyond CPI, and Phil, don't hide behind the table, man. Come out and show yourself to the crowd. But speak a little bit to kind of what metrics you look at when you're looking at CPI and or looking beyond that to evaluate all these channels and you know how valuable and how helpful they are.
Sure. Yeah. Just reiterating kind of what was said earlier. You're going to get a lot of people are going to come to you and say, hey, you know, we can drive traffic for you in your market. We'll get you 55-cent CPI, 85-cent, $2 CPI. At the end of the day, you'll know your numbers. CPI is completely irrelevant if it's not making you money. I'm sorry, I just
yeah, a lot of the metrics we've seen are like, you know, we're talked about. So looking at, I mean, I love that profit per install. That's really what it comes down to. So understanding, you know, the actual profit, because a lot of times people say, well, what's the CPI you're seeing? And it's like, well, you know, we have games companies that are paying 50 cents per CPI, or, you know, per install, and they're losing money. We have companies that are paying $5 per install and are killing it and can spend that all day long. It's just a matter of finding more users. So really look into the metrics and go beyond just that CPI number. One way I've kind of created an equation to help evaluate how well you're doing on your user acquisition marketing is this quick formula. So A times B minus C equals D. The A here is the technology behind it. Like I said, it's almost like day trading on the stock market. So whether it's a third-party agency or you're managing internally, great tech can go a long way to lowering these acquisition costs. B is the tech is only as good as the people. So you need people that are committed, that will roll up their sleeves, that are scrappy, that know how to figure this out. C is going to be the margins you're paying out. So obviously when you're evaluating whether you want to go outsourced or manage things internally, you know, that's going to affect the end goal quite a bit. And then D is kind of the sum of all of those. So what's new? I want to kind of, those are kind of the basics. Now I want to speak to what we've seen in the last month or two, last 3 months, what we think we're going to see in the next 6 months. So you've seen a little bit in the news around, this is a great title, How Facebook is Redefining Mobile App Discovery. So basically what's happening here is, you know, we've seen it, and honestly I've seen this in the space. 2 years ago when we were talking to developers about user acquisition, 4 out of 5 were probably developing for Facebook. 1 out of 5 was doing some mobile stuff. Last year it was almost an even split. This year it's completely reversed and it's probably 4 out of 5 developing on mobile. So obviously kind of going along with that, Facebook has shifted its focus and is more helping mobile apps, you know, in the discovery space. And so if you heard the Facebook presentation yesterday, that spoke a little bit about it. I just wanted to go into some of the details so you understand it. So basically what's happening is you have the App Center now where you can go in, you have mobile apps can be in there as well. Look, something like here, we've got Song Poppin' as an example. So you can drive the user still within the Facebook environment, bring them to the mobile app, essentially, or to the description of it. The Send to Mobile button will basically create a notification, which is what you can see on the right-hand side. And that, from there, the user can click, go to the App Store, download the app. So those are the nuts and bolts. One of the challenges, obviously, that's a lot of steps. So there's a lot that's being worked out. The tracking is not quite there yet. So in spite of everything we just heard about data and analytics, when you are driving, Facebook to mobile, unfortunately right now you cannot track a lot of that back-end analytics on the installs. So it is one of these things where you have to be a little bit intuitive, go into the dark and understand, what's my cost per click? Yes, is it working? And if so, we need to go in that route. But anecdotally, we have a lot of evidence that it's working well. The other kind of mode that people are using to drive mobile acquisition through Facebook is through sponsored stories. So Facebook recently announced that you can run sponsored stories, which for those of you who don't know, it's essentially promoting the action. User shared an application, user played a game, etc. So Facebook has now, you can promote those via ads and have it show up to all your friends or your fans and your friends of fans, your users, friends of users. Now you can control that and have it show up simply on mobile. So what's happening in the mobile space is, first off, there's some generic actions such as, if it's a little small, but shared application, uses application, plays games that you can promote. And then you can also define custom actions within your game. So level up, making a payment, buying this, buying credits. You can define those actions and then promote that activity. You can decide to do it purely on mobile. It shows up in the mobile feed, and then when a user clicks on it, it invites them to play the game or install the application. So that's the other big trend we're seeing. The last thing that we're seeing in the mobile space, very briefly, is as we talk about acquisition, you also talk about retention, and a lot of games companies are starting to do some really smart things with their communities and their Facebook pages to kind of essentially offer customer service. This is almost an unheard of word in the games community, but when you think of a large B2C business, there's going to be a lot of users and they're not always going to be happy. So how can you keep them happy, keep them engaged at scale? And we're seeing some great technology used on the page management side in kind of using that as your customer support channel to keep the retention numbers high. So you've invested so much in acquiring them, make sure you invest in keeping them as well. So that's all we have, but we appreciate your time and hopefully it's been helpful. Thank you. Apparently we have time for 2 questions. So if anyone has any questions, we'd love to answer them, or try to, or just deflect them in a political way.
Deflection's good.
Anything? Okay, great. Thank you. We'll be around too, so feel free to grab us.